Ebony, we have a great question from Haley, if we could get to that, please.
Yeah.
So her question is that basically, given that we're trying to not make our children colorblind, instead to see color, something recently happened where she'd like your advice on it. So I guess what happened is that just a week ago or so, her 3-year-old saw a plumber come into the house, and he was a black man, and said the black man just went downstairs. So her question is, how does she address that? Does she address it with the child? Does she address it with the plumber? Like, what's the right way to handle and or address it? And then there were a couple of really great follow-ups as well. So after you give us your recommendation, I'd love to hear from the others who chimed in.
Awesome. Yeah, I think so. I think one thing I would like remind you of is like that's totally okay, right? Like that reminder that children recognize like color and differences and things very early, and they're not doing like or saying things with this intention of hurting someone. I think the best way to approach that is to have that conversation, right? Like, yes, you recognize like, our plumber was a person of color or was a black man. And then maybe like age appropriate, right? Like asking like maybe a question like, why did you call out that? Or, kind of seeing like what made your child call attention to that, and that can maybe bring forth some good conversation. I think as far as the plumber, I don't know if it's a matter of like having a conversation. I think one of those things I've learned, and I teach this when I talk about microaggressions and bias, is especially from children, like never assume that folks are trying to hurt you or trying to offend you, right? Even with a lot of the microaggressions that we experience daily or that I talk to students about, never like walk through life with this assumption that every time somebody says something is to hurt your feelings, is to put you down. I'm sure like from like an older, man's perspective, that I don't think that it would have been offensive. However, if you feel compelled and you have that conversation with your 3-year-old, it may be worse. Like, I'm sure you heard my 3-year-old like this is something that we're talking about or learning about. She or he meant no offense, right? Like just having like maybe that touch point. I don't necessarily think it's required, but I also think you have your own discernment and you know what will make you feel better. And so I think that's also why I would suggest that. If it's something where he heard your child say that and you're just like, you know what, I just want to say, we're in a space where my child is learning and caught this out, but also encouraging your child to go a little deeper and see where that came from. And that could be that open door, right, to start having those conversations.
Ebony, this is Haley. I had asked the question, and you can read it later. It's long, but it was because it was done very loud and within earshot of everyone, including that person. So it was more in the moment of, what do you do? Do you just let it go, ignore it, laugh it off, or do you try to, say something in particular, knowing full well that they heard it, not necessarily knowing if they're offended by it, not wanting to make a bigger deal of it, and not wanting to shame the child. So, what's the right balance? And I think what I did, which I don't know if that's good or bad, was basically be like, oh, you saw the plumber go downstairs. Great. He's here to fix something. And not even acknowledge the race part, but at least focus on, yeah, great. The person's here. But that to me might also then be, who knows if he's upset. And I also don't want to call something, I might be overthinking it is probably what happens.
Yeah, and I will say like that's okay, and we all right, like we're like that's going to happen. That could be even with something that like has nothing to do with race, right? Like you just do something and you don't know like if you handled it right, if you said it right. That's just like parenting, right? Like, oh man, did I right? And so I think a lot of that is very natural and normal. I think your fix in that moment was perfect. Like yes, like he's like you explained, like yes, you saw the downstairs, he's going downstairs to fix something. And then I think later on with just your child might be the space to kind of not in a shameful way, but just in a learning way, right? Like you recognize that our plumber was a black man. Like what caused you to say that? Or, and kind of have that deeper context. And I think that's where just the conversations will come and then be like, yes, like there are tons of folks in the world, there are different races, backgrounds, and and I think that's where you can kind of start to go a little deeper when you're ready for that and maybe use that instance to reference it and have that deeper conversation. But I think what you shared is like spot on. because I don't think what you did is ignoring race in that sense. I think what it is lightening the situation and just saying like, yes, the plumber is here. He's going downstairs to fix something for us. We're appreciative of that. We love our plumber, not like love your plumber, I don't know, but like we're just really like honoring like the work that he's doing, and then later on addressing it in the best way that you feel is for your child, and based on age and things too, of course.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, thanks. This is Lisa Muchler. And Haley, I read your comment with great interest, because about probably 4 or 5 months ago, we were outside of a Starbucks, and there was a young woman there, probably 20-ish, and my son was a little over 2.5 at the time, and he said, "That's Moana," like super loud. So I know she heard. And, it was like this moment of like, I can either just like walk away or, like, what am I going to say? What am I going to do?
Moana is just so beautiful. It's a beautiful.
Yeah. Well,
just like this woman.
Right. And he is obsessed with Moana. I should note that. He has seen that movie like a million times. He got a Moana doll for Christmas. He's so into Moana. So I felt like it was a moment where I could make a choice of like, do I try to like say something now, or do I just like pretend it didn't happen? And I said, yeah, baby. She has her own name though. That's not Moana. We don't know her name, but she has her own name. And I just kind of like, wanted him to like understand that like, no, her name is not Moana. Like, this is someone else, like an individual person. And I said it loud enough that I think she may have heard me, but I'm not sure. But it's I just feel like that was the first time of probably many that I will have those opportunities. So it's like in my memory for sure. And I think, as a white person, I think this stuff is like so important to think about with our kids, because we have an opportunity to raise them differently than probably a lot of us were raised as far as that color blindness thing, because that is how I was raised, and it's not what we need.
Thank you for sharing that, Lisa. That's great.
Yeah, I was going to say thank you for sharing.
Ebony, there's another great point in the chat that I'd like to bring up that Stevie mentioned. Stevie, I don't know if you are okay with me sharing it or if you want to jump on video, but she wanted to share something about being an ally. And so she shared that some of the most valuable simple actions can be so valuable, especially from allies. So she says an example is having some of these books that you've brought up on your slides in your home. And it's so profound for your children's friends who are minorities when they come to our house after COVID to be able to see these. And it shows diversity is being seen and is welcomed in our homes. And that's such a great point. As I was reading that, I thought that's terrific. I
think that is a beautiful point. And then I wanted to shout out and thank Lisa for sharing as well, and kind of adding to, that conversation. And I think like Haley even mentioned, Moana's beautiful. Like, wait, if I'm out and somebody calls me Moana, I'm like, oh, you think so, huh? Like, you think I look like her, And so I think that reminder, even like, had that been said, right? Like, I love that idea of like, no, that's not Moana. But if you think she looks like you, like, maybe you think she looks like her. And, of course, like, maybe you don't feel comfortable saying this out loud, but like, she's very pretty, right? However, she has her own name and it's not Moana, and like, I think like that thing. But I think what that shows too, though, is your child is being introduced to that. And so that's going to happen. And I don't think it happens in ways like people are offended. Like, if somebody called me Moana, like, I'd feel very honored that like they thought I was that beautiful, because she is one of Disney's most beautiful characters. But I love like sharing just like, that idea that like things like that will happen. And I think you both shared just different ways that you handled it in very great ways, because once again, there's no like right, I'm not going to say wrong way, there are wrong ways, but there's like no one way or one right way to handle something like that. And I think what you do is you just kind of pay attention to it as they get older, and then find ways to kind of go deeper in the conversation. And then Stevie, I love that idea of having those resources. And I think, even for like Jackson, like I, ensure like everything is just there and there's lots of exposure. And I loved how, Lisa shared like her son has the Moana Dow. And, I even think of that with like Poppy, like we have like the little Poppy thing because we just love Poppy in this house. I mean, she's a troll and she's pink.
Oh, sorry, Ebony. I think Rodney, you had a point too. I think you might have gotten cut off, but I wanted to hear what you were going to share too.
That's perfectly fine. What I was going to say is we had a similar situation where a neighbor of ours in Michigan, he had brought his daughter down for the very first time. She was 3, and she was looking at my wife, who was Black. And at one point in the middle of the conversation, she just stops everyone and says, "What's wrong with her face?" Right? And he was able to figure out that she was asking about color. And his response to her was, well, God makes so many different types of people in many different shades, and we're all beautiful. Like right in that moment, that's what he said. And then she didn't ask any more questions after that. Like that was it. So he clearly had 4 other children, so maybe he had gone through it with them already, and this was the youngest one. But in the moment, he was able to both affirm her inquisitiveness, but also affirm the person that she was looking at. So
that's a lovely response that he had.
Yeah, thank you. And that you know what that is, Rodney? That's being aware myself, right? That's educating myself to be able to catch that in that moment. Because what that could have done for some parents is like stunned them and had them like, what the, Right. So it's like that shows that your neighbor or, the person that you were interacting with, like had that awareness themselves. Like, you know what, my child is one day going to recognize and notice differences, and how am I going to be ready to shift the energy, affirm who's ever in that space. And then of course, later still have those deeper conversations. So I think that's awesome. And it reminds me even of a time where I was with some students and I had to do that in like opposite way, or I guess similar way, where like a young girl was asking one of my girls about her hair. And she was just like, why did her hair look like that? And of course, I don't think she meant any harm by it. But of course, I was a little younger then. This was a few years ago. And I was just like, what is, I had to like catch myself because I work with high school girls. So, we were at Great America. It's the Illinois has a Great America here, and we were at Six Flags, and she asked the question, and then I just said, what do you mean what's wrong with her? She's like, the way that it is, it just looks funny. And I said, oh, it's because she has magic in her, so her hair is able to do that, and I just like kind of like corrected it in that way. I then though had to have a conversation with my girls to make sure they were okay, that they did, like to kind of let them know, like, she's young, she doesn't understand necessarily. But then what you do is teach that, right? And so now the little girl's probably like, oh, so she has magic, and she may not know why or like know where I pulled that from, but it's just that idea that now that's in her head, and that's something that she'll like kind of like have a reminder. And then hopefully she's being taught at home, at school, right? In these other spaces, all about differences and how to embrace them.